I never imagined I'd become the lead character in my own neighborhood soap opera, but that's exactly what happened. Life in Oakwood Estates was supposed to be peaceful, quiet, predictable, the kind of place where everyone waved politely and trimmed their hedges to match. But all it took was a single notification on my phone to turn that calm into chaos. Normally, that cheerful chime meant my grocery delivery had arrived, a simple sound I associated with convenience, not confrontation. But that afternoon, as I glanced down at my phone and saw the alert from my doorbell camera, I had no idea I was about to uncover something far bigger than a missing grocery bag. When I tapped the notification, the live feed popped up crystal clear, and there she was, a woman in oversized sunglasses, a floppy sun visor, and that peculiar air of entitlement that practically screamed HOA royalty. She tiptoed across my porch, glanced left, then right, and in one smooth motion snatched both of my grocery bags like they were hers. I blinked, rewound the footage, watched it again. It was surreal, like watching a bad sitcom, except it was my real life. And then I froze, because that woman wasn't just any random neighbor. That was Deborah Wilson, president of our HOA, the same woman who once left me a printed warning letter for leaving my trash can visible for exactly 7 minutes past collection time, the same woman who smiled sweetly in person, but was known behind closed doors as HOA Karen, the same woman who had personally welcomed me to Oakwood Estates 3 months earlier with a 50-page binder of HOA, bylaws, and a speech about maintaining community, integrity, and now she was stealing my oat milk. At first, I couldn't even process it. I just sat there replaying the clip, my jaw tightening a little more each time. For weeks, I'd noticed small things missing. A bag of apples here, a carton of eggs there. I'd blamed the delivery service, assuming someone forgot an item or two. Never once did it occur to me that my own HOA president was the culprit. The more I thought about it, the more absurd it felt. Deborah, who'd once chastised me for having grass 1/4 inch above regulation height, was tiptoeing across my porch to steal groceries in broad daylight. And she had no idea I'd caught her. Every furtive glance, every nervous shuffle, every ounce of guilt recorded in HD clarity. Now, most people might have stormed down the street ready to confront her face to face. But me? I'm a software developer. I believe in evidence, receipts, proof, the kind that speaks louder than any accusation ever could. So instead of confronting her, I saved the clip. Then I wrote a calm, polite email to the HOA board, attaching the footage for their awareness. I didn't accuse, didn't insult, didn't even mention Deborah by name. I just said I was concerned about suspicious activity on my property. And then, just to be thorough, I sent the same video to the local police department's non-emergency line. I figured that was the end of it. A quiet, professional report, nothing dramatic. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Because within an hour, my phone started lighting up with messages, neighbors from every corner of Oakwood Estates, each with their own story. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. The Johnsons down the street said their garden supplies had vanished last week. The elderly couple on the corner mentioned missing medication deliveries, twice in 1 month. And just like that, the puzzle pieces fell into place. Deborah's little afternoon habit wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. That night, as I sat at my desk working, I glanced out the window. A police cruiser was parked right in front of Deborah's perfect 2-story colonial, the same one with color-coded flower beds and a Pride of Oakwood sign out front. I wasn't trying to spy, but I could see everything from my office. 2 officers walked up her perfectly paved walkway. She answered the door with a wide, rehearsed smile, the kind you practice in the mirror. But as the conversation went on, I saw that smile falter. Her posture stiffened, her voice got sharper. Even from behind the blinds, I could feel her confidence unraveling. She gestured wildly. The officers remained calm. One of them pointed toward her house, and in her hand I could see it, a carton of oat milk. The same brand, the same order, the same one I'd been missing. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Something was happening, something Deborah wouldn't be able to control this time. The next morning, the confrontation came knocking, literally. At exactly 7:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it, still groggy from a late-night coding session, and there she was, Deborah Karen Wilson herself. Her arms were crossed, her expression furious, and her tone pure venom. "I know what you did," she snapped, before I could even say hello. "You sent that ridiculous video to the board and the police. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for me?" I blinked, holding back a smirk. "Good morning, Deborah. Would you like to come in and talk about this like adults?" She didn't wait for an invitation. She just marched inside, her perfume filling the room like an invading force. "There's nothing to discuss," she said sharply. That video was obviously edited. Anyone with half a brain could see that. I would never steal anything, especially not groceries. I drive a Mercedes, for heaven's sake. I leaned against the counter, watching her unravel. She wouldn't sit. She wouldn't stop talking. She just stood there, arms crossed, chin raised, every inch of her body screaming self-righteousness. "I have a reputation to protect," she continued. "And I could sue you for defamation." I almost laughed. But before I could respond, the doorbell chimed again. Another delivery. Another moment that would change everything. The doorbell chimed again, echoing through my living room like fate itself had decided to press play on the next chapter of this bizarre drama. Deborah froze mid-rant, her eyes darting toward the sound. I glanced at my phone. The delivery notification had just popped up. My replacement grocery order, right on schedule. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, maybe even panic. But she hid it quickly behind a brittle smile. "Oh, would you look at that?" she said lightly, smoothing her visor like nothing was wrong. "I'll be right back. I left something in my car?" Sure you did. I knew exactly what she was about to do. She couldn't help herself. The same entitlement that drove her to police. Everyone's grass height and mailbox color was about to drive her. Straight into another mistake. I followed her quietly to the front door and stepped out onto the porch, just in time to see her bending down, again, to pick up my grocery bags. The driver, still halfway to his car, turned back in confusion. Is there a problem with the delivery?" he asked, eyes darting between us. Deborah straightened, that forced smile stretching across her face like plastic. "Oh, no problem at all," she said sweetly. "I was just helping my neighbor bring his groceries inside. He has a bad back, don't you, dear?" I crossed my arms. "My back's fine, Deborah, and those are my groceries. Just like the ones you took yesterday." The driver froze. His expression shifted from confusion to awkward realization, then to the universal, "I'm not getting involved in this" look. Without another word, he climbed back into his car and drove off. And there we were, just me, Deborah, and 2 grocery bags between us. Her face cycled through emotions faster than a bad stage actor. Surprise, embarrassment, irritation, then that classic Karen arrogance. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," she said, voice trembling but still trying to sound in control. "It was an honest mistake. Sometimes deliveries get mixed up. I thought those groceries were mine." "Really?" I asked calmly. "That's odd, because my name and address are printed right here on the receipt. And as far as I know, you didn't place any orders yesterday, did you?" Her cheeks flushed crimson. She clutched her visor tighter, like it might somehow protect her from reality. "This is ridiculous. I don't have time for this. I have an HOA meeting to prepare for." She spun around and marched toward her car, heels clicking furiously against the pavement. But she didn't make it far. A police cruiser rolled up to the curb, lights flashing softly in the afternoon sun. Deborah froze mid-stride. The same 2 officers from the night before stepped out, their expressions calm but firm. "Mrs. Wilson," one of them said as they approached, "we have a few more questions about the incident we discussed yesterday." The color drained from her face. "Oh, officers, I can assure you this is all a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I was just... Would you mind speaking inside, ma'am?" The taller officer interrupted gently. Her lips twitched. She looked at me, then back at them. "Inside? Well, I suppose that's fine." They walked past her manicured hedges and into the colonial-style house she'd so proudly kept by the book. And even though I couldn't hear the words, I could sense the shift. Within minutes, neighbors began to appear, one by one, curious faces peeking from behind blinds or stepping quietly onto porches. The same neighbors Deborah had scolded for improper trash bins or non-approved fence paint now watched silently as police entered her home. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I stayed outside, trying to look busy on my phone but secretly watching every movement. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Finally, the front door opened again. The officers stepped out first, their faces unreadable. Then Deborah followed, holding a folded paper towel in one trembling hand and looking like someone who'd just watched her perfect world collapse in slow motion. That evening, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Turner, filled me in on what I didn't see. Turns out the officers had discovered 3 separate grocery deliveries stacked neatly in Deborah's kitchen, all belonging to different people in the neighborhood. Labels, receipts, names, all right there in plain sight. My missing apples, the Johnsons' missing steaks, even the elderly couple's medication delivery sitting neatly beside her sink. When the officers asked her about them, Deborah tried to play it off as community service. She told them she was collecting misdelivered packages and was planning to return them. The officers didn't buy it, especially not when another neighbor came forward with their own doorbell footage, clear video showing Deborah lifting a package off their porch 2 days earlier. That was the breaking point. She went from confident to cornered in a heartbeat. At first, she denied everything. Then she switched to confusion. Then came the tears. "I didn't know what was in those packages," she said, voice cracking. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood tidy." But when the officers mentioned that one of the stolen packages contained prescription medication, a controlled substance, her whole demeanor changed. According to Mrs. Turner, she went pale, clutching the countertop for support. She knew what that meant. Stealing groceries might have been brushed off as petty theft. But stolen medication? That was serious. By late afternoon, the entire neighborhood was outside. People stood in clusters, whispering, phones in hand, recording what they knew would be talked about for years. A patrol car sat parked in front of Deborah's immaculate home. The same one she'd bragged was the standard Oakwood should strive for. She wasn't in handcuffs, but her posture said enough. Shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, the mask finally gone. As she stepped toward the cruiser, she turned to face the gathering crowd. "This is all a misunderstanding," she cried, her voice trembling. "I've done more for this neighborhood than any of you. I pay more HOA dues than most of you combined. I've maintained these property values for 8 years. No one said a word. The silence was heavier than any accusation. For once, Deborah Wilson, the queen of rules, the self-appointed guardian of Oakwood Estates, was powerless. And standing there on my porch, I realized something. She wasn't just stealing groceries. She'd been stealing control, power, respect. And now, every bit of it was slipping away. The police didn't arrest her on the spot, but they made it clear this wasn't over. They told her they'd be in touch and that formal charges were being reviewed. Then they drove off, leaving her standing in her perfect driveway, surrounded by the whispers of people who'd finally seen who she really was. For the first time since I moved in, Oakwood Estates felt different. Lighter somehow? The tension that hung over every mailbox and HOA memo was starting to fade. But the story wasn't finished. Because the next week, when Deborah's case went to court, that's when a week later, the headlines around Oakwood Estates weren't about property values, landscaping competitions, or HOA events anymore. They were about Deborah Wilson, our once untouchable, self-appointed queen of order, now at the center of a neighborhood scandal that no one could stop talking about. It was surreal. One moment she was sending out reminder emails about trash pickup violations and approved mailbox colors, and the next, she was facing charges for theft. Real, official, legal charges. I remember the morning of her court hearing vividly. The neighborhood felt hushed. No lawnmowers, no kids playing, no chit-chat over fences. Everyone was waiting, watching, wondering how it would all play out. Deborah tried to keep up appearances, of course. She still drove her Mercedes, hairstyled perfectly, wearing a beige blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. But the difference was in her eyes. That spark of control was gone. When the courthouse doors opened, she didn't walk out with her usual confidence. She shuffled, small and stiff, escorted by her attorney, avoiding every glance from the people she once ruled over. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense. The local paper had shown up. Even a couple of news blogs were covering it, and there I was, sitting quietly in the back row, just another face in the crowd, watching the woman who once dictated my grass height now squirm under the weight of her own hypocrisy. The charges were laid out clearly, multiple counts of petty theft, with one elevated offense related to the stolen prescription medication. Each count was backed by footage, not just mine, but recordings from 3 other homes. Every clip, every timestamp, every delivery she thought no one noticed. When the first video played, my video, Deborah's attorney shifted uncomfortably. The footage showed her creeping up to my porch, glancing around and grabbing the grocery bags. The courtroom was silent except for the faint sound of her heels clicking on my porch tiles. Then came the footage from the Johnsons' doorbell camera, followed by the one from the elderly couple's home. Each clip painted the same picture: Deborah, the perfectionist enforcer, slipping up in the most ironic way possible. When the judge asked for her statement, Deborah stood up, hands trembling slightly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaking, "this is all one big misunderstanding. I was simply trying to help. Packages get misplaced all the time in Oakwood Estates. I was collecting them to ensure they reach their rightful owners." Even her lawyer seemed unconvinced. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Wilson," he said evenly, "if that were true, why were these items found opened and stored in your kitchen, some partially used?" She blinked rapidly, opening her mouth and closing it again like a fish gasping for air. I was sorting them," she stammered. "I intended to return them," the prosecutor cut in. "With respect, Your Honor, the defendant's sorting included consuming items from these deliveries, groceries, snacks, and in one case, prescription medication belonging to a senior resident. The court has photos and testimony confirming this." You could have heard a pin drop. Deborah's face turned the color of her HOA's official Oakwood cream. Her lawyer whispered something, but it was clear there was no spinning this story anymore. When the evidence was done, the judge took a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Wilson, you were trusted by your community to uphold standards of honesty and integrity. Instead, you violated that trust repeatedly. The irony here is painful. You enforced rules on others while breaking the law yourself." Deborah's shoulders sagged. Her perfect posture, her air of superiority, all of it collapsed under the weight of that sentence. The ruling was swift but firm. Restitution to every neighbor she'd stolen from, totaling over $2,000, 6 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, and a court order prohibiting her from serving on the HOA board or holding any community leadership position again. The very bylaws she'd once used to control us were now being used to remove her from power. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before closing, Deborah whispered, "This will ruin me." Her mascara streaked down her cheeks as she turned to look at the people she once scolded for lawn violations and holiday decorations. "My real estate clients will find out. My reputation is everything." The judge didn't flinch. "Perhaps you should have considered that before taking what didn't belong to you, Mrs. Wilson." And with that, the gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, a few neighbors gathered quietly. Some shook their heads. Others just looked stunned. Mrs. Turner muttered, "Karma's faster than the HOA newsletter these days." I wanted to feel triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I felt relieved. Not because she'd been punished, but because for once the community saw the truth for what it was. That same evening, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Deborah wasn't there, obviously, but almost everyone else was. The agenda? Leadership transition discussion. In other words, how to remove the woman who'd terrorized us all under the guise of order. It was the first time I'd ever seen the board members relaxed. No rigid smiles, no fake politeness. Just tired neighbors ready to rebuild. By unanimous vote, Deborah Wilson was officially removed as HOA president. Her name was erased from the community newsletter, her photo taken down from the Oakwood leadership wall. The irony was poetic. The bylaws she'd once weaponized against us, the same rules she used to fine people, intimidate them, and maintain standards, were the exact mechanism used to strip her of her authority. For the first time, Oakwood Estates felt like a real neighborhood again. People waved without judgment. Lawn heights didn't matter, and deliveries stayed exactly where they belonged. A week later, I walked past Deborah's house. The flower beds were still perfect, but the energy had changed. No more emails, no more surprise inspections, no more Karen energy hovering over the cul-de-sac. I didn't see her outside anymore. Some said she'd put her house up for sale. Others claimed she was still around but avoiding everyone. Either way, Oakwood Estates was finally free from its self-appointed queen, and as I looked around at the quiet, peaceful streets, I realized something. Standing up for what's right doesn't always mean fighting loudly. Sometimes it means pressing send on an email and letting the truth do the rest. But even then, I knew it wasn't completely over. Because if there's one thing I've learned about people like Deborah Wilson, it's that they don't stay quiet for long. And soon enough, a new chapter of the Oakwood Estates saga was about. You'd think that after being exposed, charged, and humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, Deborah Wilson would pack her designer bags and quietly disappear. But no, this was Deborah we were talking about. The same woman who once measured people's lawns with a ruler wasn't about to let her empire crumble without one last performance. At first, things were quiet in Oakwood Estates. The gossip died down and the air felt lighter. People smiled again. Packages stayed where they were delivered. For the first time in months, it actually felt like a community instead of a mini dictatorship wrapped in HOA rules. But just when we thought the storm had passed, the whispers began. She's back. She's been emailing people again. She's trying to call a special meeting. And sure enough, there it was in my inbox one morning. A long, dramatic email titled, "A Message from Your Former HOA President." It started off civil, apologetic even, but by the third paragraph, it turned into a full-blown lecture. Deborah claimed she'd been wrongfully portrayed by biased individuals, and that her so-called thefts were misunderstandings amplified by gossip and jealousy. Classic Deborah. She couldn't take responsibility if it was gift-wrapped and hand-delivered. She ended the email with something that made my coffee nearly come out my nose. As a proud founding member of the Oakwood community, I intend to remain an active voice in preserving our neighborhood's integrity. I will be hosting a community meeting at my residence this Saturday to discuss future leadership and improvements. Improvements? From the same woman who nearly turned the HOA into a personal kingdom? By noon, everyone had seen the email. And by 2 o'clock, the replies started rolling in. Polite declines at first, then more honest responses. One neighbor simply wrote, "No, thank you." Another added, "Maybe focus on returning the groceries before leading more meetings." And my personal favorite came from the Johnsons. "We'll attend once we get our stakes back." Still, a few people were curious enough to show up that Saturday, mostly the newer residents who hadn't lived through Deborah's reign. I decided to take a walk around the block, just to see how it went. From across the street, I could see her standing in her driveway, wearing her signature visor and oversized sunglasses, like nothing had ever happened. Her Mercedes was parked front and center, sparkling as always, and she had a folding table set up with lemonade and pamphlets titled "Restoring Oakwood's Standards." Unbelievable. She smiled and waved as neighbors passed. But the crowd that gathered was thin, maybe 6 or 7 people. I recognized 1 or 2 from the HOA board, both looking like they regretted coming already. I didn't plan to stick around long. But curiosity got the better of me. As I approached, I could hear her voice, still confident, still polished, but with a tinge of desperation underneath. "I've always acted in the community's best interest," she was saying. "Everything I did was for Oakwood's reputation. I've sacrificed more than anyone here to maintain order, and I won't let a few jealous individuals destroy what we built together." Someone from the back spoke up. "Deborah, you stole from people." "It's not jealousy when there's video proof." Her smile faltered for half a second. Those videos were misleading, she replied quickly. Taken out of context. Anyone who knows me knows I'd never intentionally take something that wasn't mine. Another voice chimed in. What about the prescription meds? Also out of context? That one hit her hard. Her jaw tightened, but she tried to brush it off. That was an unfortunate misunderstanding. The matter has been legally resolved. The murmurs grew louder. She could feel her control slipping, just like it had in court. I'm not here to argue, she continued, forcing another smile. I'm here to rebuild. I'm even drafting a new version of the HOA guidelines, something fairer, friendlier, and focused on community unity. Fairer and friendlier. Coming from Deborah Wilson, that sounded like a threat wrapped in pretty paper. I stood quietly near the sidewalk, watching as her speech unraveled. The more she talked, the more defensive she became. The crowd wasn't buying it. Neighbors were exchanging looks, arms crossed, unimpressed. Then, right in the middle of her monologue about integrity, her doorbell camera, the same model as mine, chimed loudly. Everyone turned toward the sound. Deborah paused, clearly annoyed. "Excuse me one moment," she said, hurrying toward her door. The crowd fell silent as she opened it, and standing there, as if the universe had a sense of humor, was a delivery driver, holding a package addressed to me. The driver looked at the box, then at Deborah. "Hi, this was dropped at the wrong address. Belongs to number 22. I raised my hand from across the street. "That'd be me." The driver smiled, walked past her, and handed me the package directly. The irony was delicious. Deborah stood frozen, caught between embarrassment and rage as half the neighborhood tried not to laugh. I gave the driver a polite nod, then looked at her and said, "Don't worry, Deborah. I'll make sure it gets to the right person this time." Her face turned crimson. The meeting ended 5 minutes later. By evening, social media groups were buzzing again. Screenshots of her email were circulating, along with photos from that awkward community meeting. The comments were brutal, sarcastic, mocking, and filled with poetic justice. That night, I got another HOA-wide email, this time from the acting board president, Mr. Carver. "We'd like to remind all residents that former President Deborah Wilson is no longer affiliated with the HOA. Please disregard any communications claiming official authority. It was short, sharp, and final. That was the nail in the coffin." The following week, a for sale sign appeared in front of Deborah's house. No announcement, no farewell note, just the silent, symbolic surrender of someone who had It's been 6 months since Deborah Wilson vanished from Oakwood Estates, and honestly, it feels like we're living in an entirely different neighborhood. The silence that used to feel tense now feels peaceful. The rules that used to hang over us like invisible chains have loosened. And for the first time in years, Oakwood actually feels like a community, not a colony run by a self-appointed queen. The new HOA president, Mr. Carver, couldn't be more different from Deborah. He's the kind of guy who waves at everyone, laughs too loudly, and starts board meetings with coffee instead of confrontation. The bylaws didn't vanish overnight, but they finally make sense now. They're about safety and fairness, not control and punishment. No more fines for leaving a garden hose out. No more inspection letters taped to doors. No more whispered threats about community standards. Just neighbors, living. Every time I walk down the street now, I see things Deborah would have hated. Kids' bikes left on lawns. Garden gnomes that don't match the aesthetic. Even a few brightly painted mailboxes that would have sent her into a full HOA meltdown. And yet, it's perfect. It's funny. When you live under someone's rule for so long, you start thinking that peace comes from silence and order. But real peace? It comes from laughter, from messy yards, from people feeling free to just be. Sometimes I still catch myself glancing at Deborah's old house. The for sale sign is gone now, replaced by a young couple who moved in a month ago. They've already put up wind chimes and solar lights. Their dog runs around without a leash and no one says a word. It's the kind of freedom we all waited years for. A few weeks ago, we held our first neighborhood barbecue since before Deborah took over. Everyone showed up. People who hadn't spoken in years laughed together like old friends. Even the Johnsons brought steaks. The same brand Deborah once stole just as a running joke. At one point, I looked around and realized something. The fear was gone. The fake smiles were gone. The email wars were gone. What was left was simple. A community that had finally remembered why it existed in the first place. Later that night, as I was cleaning up, Mr. Carver came over with a grin. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said. "Yeah," I nodded. "Better than good," he chuckled. "You know, I still can't believe the way that whole Deborah situation played out. It's like something out of a movie," I laughed. "Trust me, if I hadn't lived it, I wouldn't believe it either." Then he said something that stuck with me. "Funny thing about control, people who crave it the most usually lose it the hardest." He was right. Deborah built her world out of fear, rules, and appearances. But when that foundation cracked, everything she stood on collapsed with it. A few months later, word spread that she'd moved 2 towns over into a smaller HOA-free community. Some people felt sorry for her. Others didn't. But me? I just hoped she'd learned something. That maybe, just maybe, she realized the power she once had wasn't real. It was borrowed. And once people stopped fearing her, it disappeared. Now, every time I hear the faint ring of a doorbell camera notification, I can't help but smile. Not out of paranoia, but out of gratitude for that one tiny clip that started it all. The one that proved no one, not even the queen of the HOA, is above the rules. Funny how life works. One small act of truth can unravel an entire web of control. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. The frustration, the awkward board meetings, the stress, it all led to this piece. It showed me something important. Sometimes justice doesn't come from anger or shouting. It comes from patience, evidence, and the courage to let truth speak for itself. And maybe that's what real community is. Not about who's in charge, but about who's willing to stand up when it matters. So if you ever find yourself in a neighborhood where one person tries to rule over everyone, remember our story. Remember Oakwood Estates, and remember that even the strongest walls can't hold back the truth forever. Because at the end of the day, peace doesn't come from power. It comes from people doing what's right, even when it's hard. And that's the unbelievable true story of how one HOA president went from controlling a neighborhood to losing everything in it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because here at HOA Story Files, we dig into the wildest real-life HOA dramas you've ever heard. From petty power trips to shocking neighborhood showdowns, we bring you the stories that prove one thing. Sometimes karma lives right next door. Until next time, this is HOA Story Files signing off.